Hello and welcome to episode 11 of Talking Ruggers. We took a little break over the Christmas period. We hope you had fun in the festivities, but we are back with a bang as this week we have Luca Feser on the podcast, the founder of Curva. It is an online rugby S&C gym application for your phone to help players from the top all the way to the bottom to improve their physicality around the game. Luca has a fascinating story from his time working in technology to then combine with his experience from rowing across the world to form this app that has been helping so many people throughout rugby so far. We delve into the details behind what it takes to start a business within rugby, his advice for those who are looking to do the same, especially around the areas of technology which are ever growing within our game, and how actually rugby could be pushed forwards if there was more access to these statistics and they were packaged in a proper way. It was a fascinating conversation about things beyond just the S&C world and technology, delving all the way into the details of how the game itself is marketed. So thank you so much for joining us on this episode. If you could go down below and leave a like on it, and of course subscribe if you're new, and to go even one step further, if you enjoy it, share it with a friend. It does us the world of good. Thank you so much for coming back after a little Christmas period. Without any further ado, we're going to get straight into this. All right, Luca, talk to me. What is Curva in your own words, and what is your relationship with it?
So I guess title, let's put an official title. I'm the co-founder of Curva, and Curva is, our tagline is the Strava of rugby. So just like every runner has access to using Strava for free, we wanted to build something that allows rugby players to have access to a free workout app. So you can track all your workouts on Curva, you can log your weights, you can even follow any training plan. And we're also allowing now coaches to upload their training plan onto Curva. So if you're already an athlete who's already using a coach, well, you can then use Curva as your kind of front end or app experience. So again, log your workouts and everything, and then feedback with the coaches. So that's the kind of big picture.
That's the strap line. Talk to me where this came from, mate. How did this idea come to you?
So I grew up playing rugby and just love the space. But like most players, you realize you're just not good enough to actually make it one day.
Join the club.
No. But also, like a male ego, I always had the ambition. I was like, I want to be a pro somewhere. And my ice skating career didn't work. So I went into building software, and then I just got kind of a bit bored during COVID. And then, long story short, I've always been a rower, and this opportunity came along to become a professional ocean rower. So this idea of rowing across the Pacific Ocean. And it was a 2-year project. So the row itself was only about, it was 38 days, but 2 years leading up, which was a lot of prep, a lot of training.
Right.
And during that process, I was spending obviously a lot of time in the gym, 3-4 hours just sitting on this rowing machine. And it would always the gym would face the lifting section. And you'd see, at the time I was in Norwich, you'd see a lot of like young club boys come in with their kit on, full kit, and there was maybe 3 or 4 of them, and they were always doing the same workout. It was always so predictable. It was like an upper and lower body split, and a lot of time at the end of the session for like half an hour, they were just doing bicep curls. And then one day I went up to them and said, what do you boys like? Do you mind me asking, what are you training for? And they were like, well, our rugby coach told us to get big, like we needed to fill out. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay. So what are you like following? And they were just showing me this app, and it was a bodybuilding app. So it wasn't rugby specific at all. And that like just kind of planted the seed. And then while I was rowing, I obviously had a lot of time, like on the ocean, I had a lot of time to think. And I was like, what the hell do I want to do after this row? And then it just kind of clicked. It was like, there needs to be something rugby specific. I remember as well, I had like a really small paper and pen on the boat. And I like kind of etched out the business plan and all like the product plan on the kind of ceiling of the boat while the boat was kind of rocking and stuff.
What an origin story.
Yeah. So that's where I guess it came. And then when I came back, I was like, I got to do this. Like, this is destiny, I guess.
Yeah, right. Well, you definitely have understood the market, at least from my personal experience. So I was involved in the Bath Academy setup growing up. I was at Beeching Cliff School. Shout out to Beeching Cliff in the Ace League. And you hit 2 things real well there. We were fortunate enough to have a real good S&C program through Bath Academy. So not slandering them in any way. But one thing that was hilariously toxic in our setup was we had a set of scales in the gym at school, and if you hopped on them and were under 80 kilos, you sort of got a bit bullied. Like, you just had to, like, piss ripped out of you a little bit too much. Other than one lad called Ben Hadford-Holt, who was about 5'4" and an absolute cannonball. Like, you wouldn't get in his way, even if he weighs like literally 68 kilos. He was the one exception to the rule. But otherwise, you got flown into, and that's what warped my mentality in the gym. As much as I had this great program, I always thought being heavier, having more mass, like mass moves mass. So I just had to get bigger and bigger. And that was a problem, especially from a young age, is although I was well educated in some areas, it wasn't as holistic in that sense. And I got bigger and slower and essentially worse at rugby compared to my younger self, which got me into that position in the academy, who was lighter and could actually move around the pitch a bit more easily and beat defenders in that sense, not just with physicality, but with footwork as well. So it's interesting how you've really hit that niche there of young lads who don't quite know exactly the right way of going about things. And how are you addressing that problem?
Well, just on that as well, what we found obviously now working with a lot of academies and schools as well is what happens is, like, let's say a 16-year-old lad realizes they need to bulk up. So he starts going to the gym and he actually spends so much time bulking up, and actually probably is bulking, but naturally because their hormones kick in, they're going to be bulking anyway.
Yeah.
And not realizing they should, if they had more kind of a certain rugby specific focus and structure, they could also spend more time doing a lot of skill stuff. So what happens a lot of the time is these 16-year-old lads are getting to the age of 18 are getting really big suddenly, but they're actually not developing kind of their skills. And that skills, I don't just mean passing, but a lot of hand-eye stuff, a lot of footwork. And suddenly you've got a kid who I mean, in a generic case, but could have had potential, has actually spent too much time bulking up and not actually on the skill set. So that's kind of like, it's interesting how it can kind of go both ways. And the way we want to think about Curva is, it's like, it's an addition to a lot of your work that you're doing. We still promote massive amount of skills work. And there's always been conversation about adding certain skill work into the app as well. But for now, we're just kind of focusing on gym. But then, like, we do encourage hand-eye coordination, footwork, things like that. Then hopefully, I guess, they can come out when they're 18, or obviously plus as well.
That's what my mum always used to say to me. I was obsessed with getting like bigger and stronger, and I'm 6'3", and I've been 6'3" since I was about 15. Like, I was so tall and lanky, and eventually going to fill out. And rugby always has this obsession with size. They say that you can't teach size. People are either big or they aren't, and you have to be quite big nowadays in modern day rugby. But at the same time, it's not something that you're going to be able to change significantly. You are the size that you are. Of course, you can pack that on in the gym, but developing that more holistic rugby ability, the catch pass skills, the footwork, the game understanding, most of all, just reading the pictures and being able to respond to them in combination with that functional physical base, it's a holistic approach, surely.
Yeah, I think also the other thing to it is, which I have seen, which has been really cool again with the athletes we work with, is like when you're on the pitch, there is a lot of unstructured play. You can't always control everything. If you think about the amount of time you actually spend on the ball yourself, it's very limited. What the gym can actually teach you, at least working out, is like a certain structure, and seeing that actually if you put a process in place, you can achieve a goal and you can control that goal. And I've noticed a lot of, like, again, young athletes who early on start working out actually are able to take that onto the pitch and go, okay, what is in my control right now? Okay, usually defensively, what can I do? So actually, it's not just like, the physical element, but the gym and generally having a structured workout gives them an ability to think in a more process-orientated way that actually, I've noticed big time, helps those players on the pitch, like I said, defensively or whatever.
What's your point of difference, Luca, when it comes to actually applying these changes for people? Like, you're providing the app, but what's the point of difference over just having an S&C coach one-to-one? How do you help those younger people?
So we make it very clear, we don't actually replace an S&C coach. Like, ultimately, a one-on-one experience, what an S&C coach offers. Yes, we have a few free plans, but the free plans are just to get you going. On the other side now, we're onboarding S&C coaches who then kind of put their plans onto Curva, and then you've got athletes who come and grab those plans, basically. Or you can use the app just to work out for free, log your weights or whatever. So our goal is to kind of complement S&C coaches, if anything, because if, for example, you are in a local area and you can, work with an S&C coach, awesome. because they can look at your movement mechanics, which is stuff we can't do. Yes, you could argue we could put an AI into it. You can video record, but I'm still not fully convinced of a lot of that stuff, even being a technologist, I guess. And I actually encourage, like, they obviously, some of them can be more expensive, but just to spend a couple of sessions with one who can maybe help you, like, find like squatting patterns that are better for you. You know, a lot of people, they get told to back squat because it's the greatest thing to do for them. But then actually they realize maybe their femurs are way too long. So they're actually never really getting in a strong position. They're big guys, especially like second rows is a classic one. They've got such big femurs, they're never able to really get into a strong squat position. So they're really not optimizing a squat very well. So actually they might be better doing a hack squat, for example. But it probably takes an actual in-person conversation to do that, or to help them, I guess. So,
yeah. And I find,
do you as a 6'3" player, like for example, if you're squatting, what are you using?
I'm now more of a trap bar deadlifter through the program that I use. I find that first and foremost, it takes the stress off my lower back a little bit more, especially staying in that brace position with a high bar back squat. But also in terms of range of motion, I'm starting in a more natural position. Like that trap bar deadlift position is more of that natural jumping position, which is the whole essential point of being in that squat base, is to be able to produce force in a vertical plane of motion. So that's the whole idea of doing the trap bar, is I'm not sat deep into a squat where I'm arse below my knees, because when are you ever really in that position in rugby anyway? If anything, if you're in that position, something's gone awfully wrong. You've probably been sat down in a tackle or something. So my idea is just to stick with the trap bar deadlift because of those different reasons. I can see why people enjoy the hypertrophy benefit of squatting, because you get more stretch over the muscle. But like I said before, I'm not looking to be a bodybuilder anymore. I'm trying to actually get athletically capable for rugby.
That was I like that you say that, because again, like, every movement, it's about finding, I guess, what works for you as a player, but also spending a bit of time understanding how that movement can be applied. And that's kind of, again, where we like, we have a lot of information and hopefully research on the app that kind of helps you realize, okay, what works for me. But I'm not shitting on social media here, but maybe I am sometimes. There's just so much, like, and I actually have a theory that a lot of our training philosophy in the average person has come from the bodybuilding world, because when social media first started getting big, the people who were the most aesthetic were the bodybuilders, the big six packs and my giant arms. And so everyone would flood them going, what are you training? How do you training? Like, how do you become like that? So they would then talk about these bodybuilding splits and their nutrition and all those things. But it was like pure bodybuilding specific. And now it's got to a point where my mum's talking to me about like workout splits. And I'm like this has got so far, it's trickled down, I guess, to my mum talking about workout splits.
That is so interesting. It is how appearance influences all. And that's what gets the eyes, quite literally. So people assume that that's what's best. But now that I've started training like an athlete, my feeling I get on the field is significantly improved. I don't feel slow anymore. If anything, I feel quite the opposite. I feel fast. And whether that's just a mental thing or whether that's actually a practical, physical thing, it makes a massive difference when you're on the field. 100%. But speaking of being on the field, Luke, we're brushing over some important details here around your story. I want to get to know you a little bit better, mate. What's your upbringing through rugby? You mentioned rowing along the way, but you mentioned you played when you were younger. What's your rugby story?
I always felt like I was never the most skillful player on the pitch, but always had, really strong hand-eye, was in like every sports team. And I always felt early on, the main thing I can bring to the game was just like hard work. So naturally, when you think of who's the most hardworking player on the pitch, it's maybe like a 9, like in terms of my physique anyway at the time, being a bit more smaller, like I couldn't be a flanker. So I kind of played it as a 9. And that was kind of my growing up. And actually it was quite cool as well. We had a couple of shout outs actually. Fortunately, he passed away. Chris Greenall, he was just an unreal rugby coach because he just loved the game. He just grew up, like he played for North Walsham Rugby Club till he was, I think, 40 years old. And then his kind of coaching, it was kind of, the way I can only describe it was like cool coaching. Like you looked up to him, because sometimes as a kid, you don't really understand half the stuff the coaches are really telling you. When they're telling you to run dummy switches and stuff, you're like, okay, I don't know what this means. But I just think you're an awesome, good, cool guy. I'm just going to do whatever you want, tell me to. And then I also got really lucky for a while. We had a coach called Dave Twetti. And Dave, actually, his son, David, currently plays for Coventry in the champ. Dave was just like, he played for Tonga or Samoa, one of the island countries.
One of the islands.
Yeah. Scored actually at Twickenham. And he was such a cool, like, I don't know, just like a personal mentor, kind of arm around the shoulder kind of guy. So again, those two guys kind of just really made me fall in love with the sport, and actually more of even, I don't want to say the social bit, at school you're not going out drinking kind of social bit, but the social bit of like team camaraderie. And actually one of the main questions I always get, so why did you transition to rowing? Because obviously you think rowing is a very singular sport.
Yeah.
But actually rowing in my eyes is one of the like most intense team sports, because it's, especially if you're rowing, in a 4-up or something, because you've really got to understand the real like fine detail of each rower. Literally like a centimeter of like putting your oar at a different like angle can like affect, like have backfill effect to the last rower, for example. And so there actually is, sometimes I think of rowing as the most intense team sport out of anything, which I think is quite interesting, because as much as you can focus on trying to pull harder and stronger, if suddenly you're pulling harder and stronger without kind of indicating that to the person behind you, you suddenly, fuck up the rowing pan. And suddenly, next thing you know, it's like your oars are clashing and whatever. And that's always kept me going. And then, it's kind of naturally transitioned into ocean rowing, because again, I couldn't actually probably keep up with the best rowers in the world. But I always like to think I can outgrind anyone. So ocean rowing is nothing to do with skill. It purely isn't skill. It's like, stay awake and just carry on and don't give up. Like, that's it. Row harder than anyone else.
That's what I've always found with rowing. I have no soft spot for rowing. I, if anything, quite hate the sport, because I just think it's the most physically grueling thing. I had a rower down in the garden when I was a kid growing up, and my dad was always like, you got to go get fit, mate. Hop on the rower. And I was like, all right, I got down there, and it was just miserable, because you're there putting yourself in a hole. And you said it. These aren't my words. I don't think it's the most skillful sport in the world. Doing it as a team, 100%, but it's definitely more physically oriented than anything else. But I'd say the same about running. Of course, there's definitely technique elements to all of these things, but it's definitely more physically oriented. But at least with running, you get to go different places and different views. If I'm rowing, I'm either sat in the gym doing it, staring at a wall, or being out on a lake, I'm sure is nice, but it's probably going to be the same lake all the time. It just seems like swimming. I used to swim growing up, and I was just staring at the bottom of a swimming pool the whole time. But at least I suppose there's a bit more of a skill element to that. That's just my rant about rowing.
Yeah, listen, I'm not going to sit here and defend rowing. I'm not, because I spent hours on an erg staring at walls, watching. I think I've completed Netflix, because I would like do 3-4 hour sessions, put Netflix on, and just row. So I'm not going to defend rowing, but like I said, it was, especially ocean rowing, it's like such detail. Like, I'll give you a really simple example. We'd be out on the middle of the Pacific, and if I asked you, like, I come up to, I don't know, in a rugby game, and I ask you how you getting on, that's quite a generic question, and maybe there isn't actually much thought to it. Maybe it's more of a social thing that you just want to ask, hey, how that person is. But let's be honest, you might not even care. But like, in the middle of the Pacific, you fucking care. So if you ask that guy, how are you feeling? It's not like you actually care, because it's for the safety of the boat. It's for the safety of him, because if he's struggling, if his hands are all cut up, if his back's broken, like, it's going to affect your rowing times. And so there is a real like purity in it. And when you think of like team sport, again, some of the best teams in my eyes are the ones that have like a real purity and honesty. So they're able to have like those honest conversations. So when the All Blacks talk a lot about this, having that pure honesty in camp. So whenever they're really struggling, and even when they have, the highs and the lows, they're able to reflect and be honest why that is. And those, for me, are the greatest teams, are the ones that can do that. And again, there's nothing better to set you up than rowing an ocean and finding that out and understanding, like, you're forced to understand it. Sometimes when you're playing a game of rugby, or you're going through a season in a rugby game, you can hide those things. And it's actually very hard to bring out that honesty within a team. But when you're literally facing death, you either choose death or honesty. And I was like, I'll go honesty.
Beautifully put. Well said. It sounds like you've acquired so many skills from both the social elements of rugby with these role models growing up, all the way through to the rigorousness of rowing. How has that then transitioned you through to this life of software? Where did that start for you, and how did you progress through to business, to now owning your own business?
I like to be in the detail. Like, I'm very like process orientated person. And software is that, if you think about it. But let me take a step back. Pep Guardiola spoke about this. I don't know where I picked this up, but he liked to set his team up that 80% of what they do is structured, and there's kind of an element of process to it. So if you think about the way they maybe play at the back and stuff, and then they go up around the sides or in through the middle, there's like an element of structure. And the reason isn't just to have structure, so that the rest, the 20% of the time, can have pure fluidity and creativity. So when you think about their wingers, they're inverting, they're going out onto the wings, they're like cutting inside. So allows them to be creative and fluid. And so I actually apply that to myself. I like the idea of having a structured base, but not because it keeps fear away or because I've got OCD or I'm obsessed with something. It's more like so that I can then, when I need to, have that 20% of like creativity and expressing myself. And actually software has, in my eyes, quite similar things. Like if you set up a really lovely, not going technical, but like code base, then suddenly like the rest, the really beautiful app that we can then build on top of that, and the way we make someone feel, that's the fluidity and the creativity. So that's kind of like, I guess, my personal kind of life philosophy and the way I kind of approached Curva as a business.
Creativity without a framework is chaos.
Yeah, there we go. You got it.
It's the same with rugby. We talk about formations, shape in attack, having a 1-3-3-1 system or a 2-4-2 or a 2-3-1-2, like whatever system you want to have. People talk about rugby's becoming so prescribed, but it's the professionalism of the sport that's resulted in that. Coaches trying to control every extraneous variable, so the more they can prepare, the more likely it is they're going to achieve their outcome come game day on a Saturday. However, it's the creativity within the framework that is the point of difference now, because every team has the framework. Everyone's got the same shapes nowadays, give or take. It's now your ability to navigate that collectively within a team that is the point of difference. So you're right, Pep Guardiola's onto something there. That guy seems to know what he's talking about. It is a good framework that is the foundation, but the creativity is the spark to set it all alight. There's no point in having one without the other.
You know what I always think about as well? Like a big word I like to think about is I actually have a tattoo kind of based on this idea of like intent. So you can build like a structure and a process, but what is your intent to building that? Because everyone wants structure and process, and everyone does build structure and process. But the intent, is it because you're scared of, from the kind of fluid rugby, you're losing the ball? So you've built a process based on fear because you're scared of constantly dropping the ball, losing the ball, like being turned over? Or is the intent actually you want to encourage creativity? It sounds really silly, but that is like a really like small difference, but it literally sets the complete different foundation as a squad. So if your coach is building a foundation based on fear, the whole structure actually, I don't even know how to describe it, non-existent in some way, or it's just a crumbly structure. It's like kind of shoveling shit in some way. Whereas
100%.
if it's based on creativity, it's a real like honest and strong structure, and then they can go out and do that. And again, not my words, Pep, my mate.
Yeah, just copy and paste, mate. You're stealing like an artist. But you're right. The foundation of I call it the game playing pyramid, is what I've sort of developed with Level Up Rugby. The foundation is always mentality. There's no point in having a great attacking shape or defensive system. There's no point in having great catch pass. No point being massive because you got good, like big in the gym. There's no point in having a good tactics of running this unders and overs shape if you don't have the right mental framework to enter that situation come game day to perform. If I don't have the confidence to throw the pass necessary to execute the unders and overs within the attacking shape to give the ball to my biggest ball carrier, because I don't have that faith from my coach, well, what's the point in the rest of it? You've got to have that mentality before you start layering on top all these other elements to a game. It all starts psychologically.
And you know what? I want to add something to this because, so we're talking quite high level, and like coaches will go, okay, yes, I'm going to build this foundation, or players, they want to, and then, but I always think when it's really important when you have these conversations of this like high level thing, like, okay, let's give someone actually a tangible thing to walk away with. And one of the things I've recently been applying to a lot with these kind of like, how do you make something more tangible? It's this idea of like trigger points. So, when you are, let's say, in a game and you've got, suddenly the game is unstructured, what is a trigger point that allows you as a person, or you as a player or an athlete, to kind of refocus to where you can give yourself structure. And then hopefully also everyone else can do that as well in their own ways. Everyone has their own trigger points to then apply that. And the reason I mention this, maybe it's slightly off a tangent, but I think it's really important that it's really great that we talk about structure and creativity and whatever, but like to bring something more, solid into the conversation is like find trigger points that work for every player. And might even be a team trigger point. Sometimes certain call outs or whatever. I remember Dan Carter used to, before he'd kick, smack his left leg. And that was his way of triggering into what is his process, to then allow him to kind of flourish and kicking.
It's interesting how the worlds of coding and technology and science and things cross over with sport and that side of things. And I want to get a bit more insight into what your day-to-day looks like and what advice you may have for someone who's looking for a career in both sport and technology, because that's an interesting area now that's starting to grow a little bit more with the likes of Curva, with Nudge Rugby, for example, we've discussed in the past, with the goal kicking tracking app. Like, technology is integrating itself more and more. You only have to look at the stats that are now involved in the game, with the chips inside the ball that track kicking distance and passing length and things like that. What is your day-to-day looking like in terms of building this app out? But also, what advice might you have for someone who's trying to break into rugby or sport technology?
So, I mean, data is super random in the sense of like, usually Mondays we have like a product kind of meeting where we discuss, okay, what do we wanted to build this week? But then I also spend more and more, we laugh about this, I've become more of a content creator, which is, like you realize ultimately there's only two things, right? You can build the greatest app in the world, whatever that is, right? But if no one uses it, no one finds out about it, no one cares.
Yeah.
Like that is the truth. And you have to find a balance. We in the product world like to think that the best product will always be found. And I think there's a truth in that. Ultimately, over time, that will happen, maybe in a 10-year horizon. But like you still have to find, or you still have to create opportunities for it to be found, right? And a lot of people get that wrong. There's some awesome, I don't sit here and go, Curva's the best gym app like ever built. Like we like to think we're definitely the 1% now, but the reason the other gym apps haven't succeeded, whatever is because they just haven't been found, right? So that's one thing. Like I spend a lot of time thinking about distribution, and that isn't just creating content, but like how do we get found on Google? Like I want anyone to search gym rugby, those two words, Curva has to come up. When someone puts it into ChatGPT, how do we make sure we get found first? So we spend a lot of time thinking about those, and we kind of call them growth hacks. How do you kind of, dirty word, but like hack your way to growth to kind of do that? And we've adding stuff, for example, even like leaderboards and a social feed into the app, so that encourages players to share with their friends, right? Because people naturally, if they like something, will share it with their friends, and then their friends will share it with their friends. And Facebook is, the best example of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I spend most of my time there. We really focus. So we're not fundraising, even though we could. We're just like honed in on what we're doing. And to answer your question, actually, if someone came to me and goes, I love, I'm a software developer, I love tech, or I work in tech and I love sport, how do I get into it? I actually would say the first thing is media. And the reason I say that more than ever is if you can own distribution, you can always add products on top. Nowadays, with a caveat, it's pretty easy to build certain tech stuff, app, website, whatever, with website builders, with app builders. The reason the caveat is there, because a lot of them still aren't. I think people think it's easy, but actually once you build an underlying logic in an app, it's actually very complex. But still, let's pretend it's easy, and it's easy to get going and easy to test out things. But nowadays, the hardest thing is getting them in front of audience. So if you are someone who actually wants to be in the space of sport, I would actually think first, how can I build an audience? How do I build a community? How do I build something I'm interested in, and then other people would be interested in? And then it doesn't even have to be tech. You could just look at draw like mouth tape for rugby players. I don't know. But you could, if you build that first and then try and find an audience, it's probably going to be harder.
It's a conversation that I love having, and to hear it coming from someone else is music to my ears, because I'm usually the one preaching it. I have a degree in marketing and I've always been fascinated by it because at its core, it's just communication. It's not anything fancy. Of course, you can find some complex medium through which to communicate people to. The most common of which nowadays, as media shifts towards short form content, is now social media. Whereas back in the day, the biggest form of marketing was billboards or newspaper ads. It shifted over to radio ads and all the way through to television ads. And now we're on to this attention oriented social culture where it's now social media. And if you can create organic content, by the way, for free, you don't have to pay to advertise. If you can just create a good piece of content with a high social reach, then you can communicate with exactly the audience and demographic you're trying to reach. It's a whole minefield when you come down to creating the good content. That's the skill in it, but it's the way that you communicate to those people. Because you're right, it's all well and good creating a brilliant app. Like, you're going to need S&C coaches who have the knowledge and expertise there. You're going to need your expertise in terms of coding and software. But end of the day, like you say, that's worth almost nothing if you can't communicate to the people you need to talk to get them to start using it. Because if they're unaware of it, no matter how good your app is, they're never going to be able to even know the name of it to download. So it's that balance. And it's interesting how your role in a new startup, going from being an employee within the software space to now being a top level executive, is shifting away from your core responsibilities and diversifying through to understanding marketing and how to actually push, especially on socials, which is, like I said, the biggest and best place to be organically nowadays.
The other thing to add to that is that's really important. Like, as a founder of anything, they always say you have to be in the weeds, right? And you have to like live and breathe what you do. Obviously, I use Curva every day to work out, so I'm already in the weeds in the tech side. But like, I want to live and breathe what our user and audience is doing. You know, like, if there's news come out, I want to know about that news straight away in the rugby world, like that. And then it's not just about like, yes, of course, I'm going to package that news up and try and make content around it. You know, if Henry Pollock scores a try and celebrates with his finger up or whatever, I'm like, okay, how can we use that for certain content? Of course, you have to think like that. But at the same time, it's also, I want to have that same emotion and feeling that they kind of receive as a user. I think when you look at, in my eyes, the biggest, best tech company. I mean, this is so cliche to talk about Elon Musk right now, but he is literally in the weeds of it all the time. He's feeling it all the time. I bet he was driving a Tesla every day. So he's just constantly feeling, like, within even the Twitter sphere, of what it's like to tweet, right? And I think that is the core. And I always think the tech companies that you can see fail and drop off are the ones that just, like, the CEOs just kind of, the co-founders are left and there's no founder in the business anymore, but also they just, yeah, they just don't have that flaming passion, I guess, for it anymore.
You got to properly take a deep dive if you can. And that's something that I'm learning along the way at the moment, where I've now gone full time with my business and I'm in and amongst it every day. There's no distractions. And you've got to be in a fortunate enough position to be able to, or usually financially afford to be able to do that. But the best way to learn the right skills, there's no piece of one best advice. That's something I often say in coaching. Like, kids will come up to me, like, well, what can I do to go pro? What can I do to do this? And I was like, there's nothing I can tell you right now that's going to teach you more than get as many reps in as you possibly can. That's where the real value comes in. It's not about me giving you this one golden piece of advice of, oh, actually, if you do this one thing, it's going to be this. It's about, I can't emphasize enough to you, go and work as hard as you possibly can, and you'll learn everything that I could possibly teach you yourself. Because that's the best way to go about doing those things, is to just involve yourself and throw yourself in the deep end.
I mean, this is, I don't know if this is even good advice, but like, you just have to be so obsessed. Like, but it's not even, again, it's not like, you could be obsessed about rugby, but that's not going to help you build Curva, for example. Like, even before we got onto the call, I spent an hour just understanding everything about you. Like, wanted to know everything about, like, how, even like, you talk about your height. I didn't know how tall you were because I've never seen you in person, but I made sure I knew that, because that does change things. There's a lot of factors, height changes on a person. And that's kind of what it's about, like, obsession of what's always next to come, of like, and I think a lot of people, the reason they jump that obsession is because maybe they see, obviously, the shiny object too far in advance. And it's very hard to be obsessed for a very long period of time. Like, it's classic, but Monday morning you're like, I'm going to the gym, and then Friday you've fallen off the rails. It's because you've basically created, like, even a week is too long to be fully obsessed about going to the gym. You have to be obsessive like that Monday, like going to the gym. You have to be obsessive when you wake up, like what you're going to eat, and then going to the gym. Be obsessed about that moment. And I guess maybe you could rephrase that as like living in the moment. Maybe that's a way of doing it. I don't know. But yeah, just, I don't know. I think obsession is a really nice thing. It's like other people call it passion, but I think it's cool.
It's an interesting balance between obsession and, well, you talk about Elon Musk, for example, as being someone who's like obsessed and overly involved. And I look at Johnny Wilkinson, for example, and hear a quote from Kanye West before he fell off the rails about how a lot of mental health illnesses or issues, if framed in the right way, can be seen as superpowers. Like his bipolar, his ADHD is probably an incredible source of creativity for him. It gives him a depth of feeling that allows him to explore themes in people that they resonate quite deeply with. Whereas on Johnny Wilkinson's side, his obsession, although resulting in compulsions and a bit of OCD, I'm sure, as time went on, through his fear of God and whatnot, ultimately resulted in being, in my opinion, the best player in the world. When you have that obsession, you have that potential illness, if not taken care of, but you can channel it and really start to push yourself forward, utilizing it. That's the way that you can
Mhm.
differentiate yourself. It takes that degree of insanity to become top of your field. There's not many people who are going to be at the top of any industry. You talk about at the start being a professional, whether that's rugby or whatever. There's not many professionals out there at the top of their game. And I mean the top people who don't actually have a degree of insanity about them. They've got something that is differentiating them to allow them to reach that stage.
And just to also make this very clear, because I think when, especially we tag Elon Musk in this afterwards, and he's obviously going to retweet us,
Yeah.
people are going to think, oh, you have to just like, you have to be an absolute animal and machine of obsession. But actually, you know what? The the 1% that actually make it really successful in something is that they understand the obsession, but they also understand how to feed it and how to not turn it on and off, but understand like there has to be a certain balance to your obsession. So you can't be obsessed with like 10 different things, but you also can't just go so far that you burn out. So it's
Yeah.
like there's a self-awareness of your obsession, and that you have to feed it at the right times, but sometimes you take it away. And a great example is obviously like if you're in the evening and it's 8 p.m. and you're like, I could get my laptop out for an hour and then go to bed, or I can actually spend a bit of time, I don't know, with my girlfriend as an example, and play some cards or whatever. So like, but that's still obsessive. Like you're still obsessed about that one thing, but you also understand, like, have that self awareness. And again, for rugby, the best example is like if you just trained in the gym 3 hours every day, yeah, you're obsessive, but you haven't got your obsession under control. You haven't understood what your obsession is. And actually, that's probably the most dangerous thing, I'd say. Someone who's like, if anything, obsessed with being obsessed. There's no longevity in that. Like, and life is, long.
You mentioned the longevity of things and staying obsessed for a prolonged period of time, and that's what it takes, especially in social media. Yes, you can blow up overnight and be an overnight success, but your career is usually as short-lived as its start. I've been creating content for 5 years now. If I didn't have that degree of obsession, that intrinsic reward from the process, and only relied on the likes and the follows, then I
Right.
would have stopped after a few weeks because nothing came in too quickly. So it's about having that balance. But we're talking an awful lot here about individuals on an individual level. Some good advice there for some people. But I want to delve now into a broader topic of conversation, the collective around rugby, and taking your understanding from sport, technology, the gym, and really diagnose some of the issues in rugby and what you might think some of the solutions are from your experience through all that you've done so far.
So I'm going to start off with actually something way more positive. I fucking love the product of rugby. And I'll tell you why. I was in the US recently, went to go watch ice hockey, and it was okay, but it was 3 times 20-minute game, so 60 minutes. I was there for 3 hours because of all the entertainment around it. Then I went to watch an American football game, same again. And straight up, clickbait, those products are crap. Like, I don't think in my opinion, game of rugby, even though we're so used to having this free-flowing game of rugby of 80 minutes, and actually you sit down and after, what is it, an hour or 100 minutes or whatever, it's finished because, break and then there's a few interruptions. And now we're maybe at 110 and we complain about that extra 10 minutes of it not being as free-flowing because of, go and watch an American football game. You'll be there for hours and they think they're entertaining you, but they're actually not. In my eyes, they're just kind of making you really dumb, fitting you like with some adverts all the time. I think it's, honestly, rugby is such a cool product. And actually, even when I watch the Premiership on the weekends, I'm like, there's free flowing. Of course, you can have teams that are a bit more like box kicking, whatever, but that's just like a style of the game. And you should appreciate that you can have different teams, have different styles and whatever. So the reason I want to start with that is because if you understand that you actually have a really good product, you really do. F1 is another one where I think F1 has a really good product, but what F1's done really well is they've packaged that product up for everyone. And I think this is super cliche because all the podcasts and news journalists talk about this, but I don't think rugby understands how to actually package its product. That's my big kind of like conclusion. And one of those, I'll give you a really like tangible example. So I did some stuff in kind of the F1 space in the past, and we were working with sponsors, right? And they could tell us the exact seconds that a sponsor or our logo, for example, so we were trying to advertise on F1, our logo would be shown in advance, but also in the past on TV. And then what is the audience that's watching it, the age range, the gender split, the income gap, or the income of the audience. And then we could literally like put those things together. And I actually had a tangible thing as an investor of that sport or as an investor of that media to actually go, okay, I'm going to get a return or I'm not. Just don't think I don't know the exact details of the rugby now, but it doesn't seem like that's a thing. There doesn't seem like there's enough data to really be able to do that. And that's why you've got these bigger brands like a Gallagher or whatever that just buy the whole thing. I bet you they don't even know if they get a return, but they just go branding, name. It's good. It's good for our clients. We can take them to Twickenham every year and whatever. And that for me is where it completely falls apart. But I also get really excited as a technologist because there's some really cool stuff you can build in that space to help them out. And I'll give you another example of something I'm so obsessed about is, so again, I grew up actually in Formula One, like the space. And the one thing I love about Formula One is super data orientated. And yes, of course it is because, you have tire wear and you've got engine lasting and fuel reserves. But when you're watching the F1 race, a 2-hour race, you're constantly seeing new data, obviously positioning, but also like, what is the tire wear? What is the predicted, like how long can Lando Norris drive on his McLaren to the rest of the race? Is he going to make it? There's an element of like, making someone as a Lando fan maybe anxious of like, shit, he's got like, is he going to make it with 5 laps to go or whatever on his tires? And the screen is constantly showing data. I think in rugby, there's a huge potential to do the same. Like show more player data on the screen. Show like the max run Ellis Genger's done. And I know teams are obviously a bit worried about exploring or exposing some of that data. Of course they are. You got to be smart about it. Of course, you're not going to show, if Ellis Genger's about to drop off and pass out. But there's stuff you can show. I don't, as a fan, that engages you in that specific. So again, if there's a scrum, and we're waiting 2 minutes, expose some really cool data. That makes it really interesting. I know they now have pack weight at the start of the game. They show the pack weight, and that's it. That's it. And as a viewer, you do like that, but you get that once,
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm obsessed with this topic. I think there's some really cool stuff. If anyone's building it, if you can come to me, I'd love to help out. But this is, I think, where, again, very simple. Product is sick. Love the product, but just the distribution sucks. Just not good enough, really. And that isn't solved by just signing better media rights. That isn't solved like those. Yeah, it's solved by like going into the detail of where can you improve the kind of fan experience. And that's not, again, fireworks and whatever.
2 words. Rugby combine. That's what we need, at least for the youngsters, because like you see it in the NFL, and they're an example that a lot of people pull from into rugby because it's a contact sport, similar sort of setup. And they have this incredible system where you get picks, and if you finish last, you get the top pick, and it's all from the combine, all the stats, all the data. How fascinating, even putting rugby up against American football, that data would be. I think it is an interesting lens to look at things through, is through the statistical side of things. And if you could provide people with that information. So we had a draft system like they have in American football, where these 18-year-old lads go in and we test out how powerful they are. Not only is that a viewing spectacle, but it provides additional insight to then keep on plugging through. It's just more for people to see more. And that's where it comes back to your first point of the commercialization of the sport, because it's all well and good wanting more, but who's paying for it? Who's actually going to be able to finance this so we can put these sorts of things on? And that's where everyone moans about the ball in play time and like how boring rugby is because there's such low ball in play time. But then you make the example of American football and you're scratching your head to why anyone could ever complain about rugby, because it is so much ball in play time. It's just like you're saying, packaging, marketing, communicating, all these certain things in a more, not necessarily positive, but just a more engaging way. And I think we're starting to do it.
If you've ever gone to a rugby game, every person in that stadium thinks they could be the coach. Like everyone does that. Always. So I think the sport should lean into that, right? By giving people more stats. Yes, they become louder voices because they're like, oh, I knew Reece Samet was tired because I saw that stat, whatever. But let them be that coach. Like, let them embrace, because when they are the coach, they feel like they're in the game. And suddenly you have people who are more obsessed with your product because they're like invested in that. So like, I know a lot in rugby at the moment has been about the social media element of like, get players to expose themselves a bit more. And I think that's great. That's awesome. The women's game has done that just unreal. And I think that should continue that conversation. In football, for example, I have a fantasy football, like a Premier League football, FPL team, whatever, with my friends. In rugby, I know there is one, but again, there isn't enough really going around to, make people feel obsessed about the sport. And why isn't just because, they don't see Marcus Smith on YouTube. It's because I don't know anything about his physical stats. I don't know anything about his running speeds, his passing numbers. Whereas in football, you do. All those data points are always available to you, or at least partially at times. And in rugby, none of that is. And actually, Adam Mosseri, I think his name is, he's the CEO of Instagram. Mm-hmm. And it was on a football podcast, and they asked him, like, what can football do more of? And he spoke about people want to see like training. They love, apparently one of the most like engaged posts are when people show their warm-ups before a game. So it's not even giving pre-match analysis. It's like, I want to see Erling Haaland. How's he warming up? How's he stretching? Why is he suddenly able to jump so high? Oh, it's because of those stretches he did before, that warm-up or whatever. And I get like, that is why, no, I don't want to go, why is rugby not doing that? But that's where I think rugby should go into, rather than, they're focusing too much on trying to sell media rights. But again, they haven't got a package to sell. There's no data points. Like if I come in as an investor or someone who wants to buy media, what am I buying? Tell me.
Yeah. There's the unpolished content that does really well on certain social platforms. I watched the same clip that you've seen of the Instagram CEO discussing how most professional players in football will post these really well-polished photos of their game, like from the weekend. But what people really want to see is that insight. They want a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff, and that's definitely the case with rugby, but they're so closed off to it. So many of these higher-ups are so backwards thinking because it's going to kill the sport. So what are you holding on to as for dear life here if it's going to die eventually anyway because you're not opening yourselves up to these things? And for the most frustrating thing for me, I think it might have changed, but fantasy leagues were just on web browsers. Give me an app. Mm-hmm. Give me an app where I can just tap it. I don't have to log in every time. I don't have to refresh the page. It's just my app. It's so jarring. I just want to have something clear cut. And again, it's how you package it. It's not that there's a problem. The idea is great. It's just the execution of it. That's a common rugby saying, that where he's had the right idea to kick the ball, but he's put it out in the full. That's essentially what they're doing here. Like, we have a good product. I don't think rugby's in the bin completely. It's just how we're going about executing things. And that's what I was leading on to talking about, is like Bath and Saracens, for example, two teams leading the charge in that off-field entertaining style content. But you're talking about some insightful things that really add to the viewing for those armchair analysts, those rugby noises. Like, everyone listening to this podcast right now would enjoy that, I don't doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, Saracens rebrand is so cool. I love it. But and that's good. I always think of like that's great, like high level surface, right? But now I do think Saracens definitely got to make sure they also need to go into the detail, like show obviously the cliche, but behind the scenes of certain players, like dig into. So on the weekend, I think I can't remember his name. There was a second row. The kid was 18.
Oh, the Quins lad, yeah.
The week before I was at my old school and I was doing some coaching stuff, and some of those boys are 18, right? And I was like just thinking the comparison to those guys and him. And I would have loved to see some stats about this kid who I don't know anything about as a viewer. I don't even know his name now. But if I saw how much obviously I don't want to make this curve related, but I saw like benching figures or his like 100-meter dash figures, or I don't know if it has to be gym related, of course, but you know what I mean? Saw stats that are really interesting about this kid and gave him like a personality. Then as a viewer, I'm already buying into more than just like, a name that's come on and it's his first appearance. That's not enough. Like, we need to make I need to have walked away from that game knowing so much about this kid. And I don't know anything. I don't even, like I said, remember his name. And like, that's where we talk about obsession again. It's like, make the audience want to be obsessed, so give it to them. Like, it's yeah. I could talk about this all day because I think that would. So I don't want to say it's easy, but there's so much to unlock in rugby compared to other sports. Like, if I'm an investor, I would put everything into rugby, knowing obviously that this would happen, because it has such a good high ceiling.
So much potential. And that's because I think so much of it is untapped. There's just a bundle of resource there to start pulling from, because rugby is arguably the most athletic sport in the world. I always see this debate around props being the most hybrid athletes in the world. Like, can you name another position or athlete in the world who can bench, squat, deadlift as much as a prop, hold that sort of isometric position in a physical contact area, then have the combat ability in contact, plus the ground speed, plus the dexterity of catch pass skills and game awareness than any other athlete in the world? You'll say that, yeah, Usain Bolt's faster, but he doesn't have the same sort of catch pass skills, does he? Not beating Alice Genge in a 1v1 run it straight challenge. So there's such a depth of resource in terms of the human capital that we have within rugby. It's just our ability, like we mentioned, to really start pushing that. And I was talking to Owen Belly, who's the head of content for England Rugby. We're going to get him on the pod, so keep your eyes out for that, guys, in the future. And he was talking to me about the content that does really well for England Rugby is the stat stuff. Plus, the other side of things, he said he'll put me in touch with the head chef for England Rugby, because that kind of content, that insight, people love to see. Or what are England players doing? Because it's such an interesting athletic build that rugby players have. How do you maintain that? How do you manage that?
You talk about the chef. I don't know his name. I know who you're talking about. But I think I know more about him as a person and him as like what his job involves than I do some of the England rugby players. Because they've released, like, I know people are now obsessed about watching what he's cooking and stuff, and like how many calories he's providing and stuff. That shows you if your top content is around the chef of a team, right? And people know more about him than they do of the players. Not, by the way, this is not to diss England. I think actually I love what they do. I'm just saying as a whole. Then you've got to understand that, like, it's not specifically the chef that people care about. It's the details behind it, the facts and figures behind it. So once you realize that, you could do the same with every player. You could do it with kitmen. You could do it with like every other coach. Like, I was at a game, Scottish Nottingham, start of the season. You know who the most interesting guy was? There was a bagpiping guy who was like, his title I think was head of entertainment. And he's an American actually, but he's been bagpiping at Scottish ground for the last like 20 years or something. And like the guy was so fascinating, and he was like, I had more information about him than I did players playing for Scottish. And that's the kind of like rugby has it all. It's just like, just expose it, just like bring it out. And actually, something I wanted to ask you, which is not just, I don't think we're talking a lot about the physicality and the game itself, but something I think, and this is very hard to make tangible, I think, but the one thing, or the beauty about rugby compared to maybe some other sports is it has a real like depth in culture. And that is grassroots, of course, but also like the psychology. Like a lot of teams for a long time, still now, aren't like massive organizations, but the depth they go into, like of psyche of team building, individual like analysis of like how to work with the players and stuff, talking about obviously mental health stuff as well. And you compare it to like an NBA or a football, they are way behind. Like we work with some Premier League stuff, and like, I can't believe how little they talk about like the psychology of a team compared to rugby. All Blacks were obviously way ahead of the game for a long time on this. And again, like for me, I don't want to talk about monetizing that, but like that needs to be made into something. You know, top England football coaches come to England rugby to ask them for advice on how to do that. How many times have you seen Gareth Southgate go, when it was Eddie Jones at the time?
There's definitely something there, mate, and it's all around access, like you say, having that access, which rugby is so reluctant to give out.
Where do you think, like, if I said to you right now, tomorrow, like, you have a year contract with the RFU, what would you go and do, like the main thing that you would go and do?
For me, as we've alluded to so far, whether it's just top of brain because it's on the conversation, but access, without slandering too many people, because I'm trying to keep some friends in the rugby space, but there is limited access to players and individuals. Like the players themselves are pretty willing to work with you. Like when I shoot content for a series on Pro Player Insight, where I provide young players with access to information from top of the game. So Ellie Kildun is the most recent person that I work with. That's great. The players are so keen for it. When it comes to the coaches about getting access to training sessions or World Rugby giving access to almost anything, it is incredibly difficult to come by. And that's the start. Like you're talking about earlier, communicating. How can you communicate about stuff when you can't even access it in the first place? Yeah. That's where I'd start. And then from there, you open the door to all those other things. Again, linking back to what we mentioned earlier, there's no one thing that I do in particular other than open the door. Just got to open the door to access all these other things that are going on within rugby. And then from there, you learn all the things you need to know. That's my opinion. What about you? What's your take?
My one would mainly be about quantifying things. I think if, like anything, if you have a discussion with your family member or in work with your business partner, if you can quantify something, it always gets you further into a conversation. And like I said, I think, if brands come in and they, for example, want access to working with Ellie Kildun, just as an example, whatever, how can that brand quantify to World Rugby the return they'll bring to World Rugby? And I know that sounds hard right now because stats, there's just nothing around. But if brands are able to access those stats more, they can actually then make more business cases. A really good, randomly, a podcast worth listening to, it's called The Business of Sport. And they just had on the CMO of Revolut, Antoine Delin, I think his name is, or French guy. And he spoke, they asked him why did he, because they're now sponsoring the Audi F1 team, and they asked him why. And it wasn't like they planned to go into sport. They kind of fell into it. And one of the big factors was they could quantify the return. He could go as a CMO to his CEO and go, this is why we're going to invest into the Formula One, like into Audi, because at the end of the year, we're going to have 2 million in profit from this. And there's like quantifiable things. And that's because F1 was able to give them that data. Whereas in rugby, you can get that data, but the brands have to do it themselves. So they spend so much time, investment trying to get that data that it's just not work. Like that already eats into their time and costs. And so I think that, in my opinion, how you kind of go about it. And then you also, here's the interesting thing. It's not just about the teams or the clubs. You give the players that data to be able to sell, in the sense, how much is each player worth? And that isn't by contract, but like as a media brand, You know, like again in the women's sport, it's a great example. Ellie Kildun right now, if you wanted to work with her, I'm sure it'd be so hard to get hold of her. But there's so many other athletes that you could be working with, but as a brand, you don't really understand or know any of that, and neither does the athlete, to be really honest. So it's more kind of creating that transparency of like how much is someone actually worth in kind of the media space, and then you will attract brands. Like, yeah, one last example, Curva. I'd love to do some rugby sponsorship, but like, I'm spending so much time. Where do I start? Do I go to a Premiership club who will, and ask for a side of the pitch? Do I go to a grassroots club and we have like a couple of grassroots clubs that have our kit sponsor? But like that was so informal. Like where would I start to get have a conversation with Ellie? I don't know. Like, and what return is Ellie going to give me? I don't know.
Spot on, mate. Great take. That's a great take. Yeah. I'm so with you on that. Having the metrics around things really does help quantify and professionalize things. It's a way that rugby can actually start to be taken a bit more seriously. I'm so with you on that, man. It's been a great conversation. For those who are still listening, thank you guys so much for tuning in to Talking Ruggers. How can they help you out, Luca? How can they help out Curva? What can the listeners do for you today?
Well, you can go and download the Curva app, of course, in the App Store.
Good start.
CURVA. And honestly, just like we're going to grow if the sport of rugby grows, and ultimately also around performance. Like naturally, 20 years ago, no one would do an ice bath or even stretch before and after a game, and now they will. And that's where Curva kind of comes in. So we do everything off the pitch. So yeah, that's kind of how you can find us. And again, we're trying to get viral on social, like everyone.
Rising tide raises all ships, as they say. Yes, 100%. Jump on the Curve app. It is a delight to the eyes, a really well laid out and easy to navigate app, and provides you with some easy to use programs. I've had a little dive myself, so I do recommend it. So give it a go. And of course, engage with as much of the content as possible. I know Curva are putting out some good bits and bobs. I've been discussing at the start of the episode around marketing the business. You guys are getting out there and providing some good content. So go give it a little follow on Instagram, TikTok as well, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you guys for listening so much. Really do appreciate your time, Luca. It's been a great conversation. And well, I'll talk to you again soon. And I'll talk to you guys again next time. Go well on the weekend. I hope your training week goes swimmingly. I'll chat to you next time. Gotta